Gene Wilson loved his family. It's one of the reasons he worked as hard as he did. Wilson owned a restaurant in West Baltimore, and it's there where police found his body in 1969.
From the best of our knowledge, he was taking money up to his office of his restaurant, and there were men waiting for him upstairs who had planned to rob him.
Wilson was robbed and stabbed 30 times. Karen was just 13 years old when her father's killer was convicted.
And we were told that he would never be released from prison, ever.
It's all because of this man, Merle Unger, a convicted cop killer. Last year, the Maryland Court of Appeals ruled that the judge's instructions to the jury violated Unger's right to a fair trial, so he was granted a new one. As a result of that decision, hundreds of convicted killers in the state of Maryland have also requested they be retried, and in many cases, they've been set free.
In many of these cases, what we're finding is the defendants are really very old and infirm, and there's really no threat to public safety anymore.
In Baltimore City, 14 offenders have already been released from prison, the majority convicted of committing heinous crimes.
And every one of these defendants has served at least 30 years.
It's estimated 100 cases could be affected in Baltimore City.
So they're in our communities now.
While city prosecutors have yet to challenge any of these cases, the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office has, and so far, they've been successful at it. But they're prepared should that change.
Certainly, if a judge does rule that a new trial is going to be granted, we will move heaven and earth to find as much evidence as we can from when that case originated.
I actually tried to find that.
Karen wishes that would have happened in the case of her father's killer.
Are you scared?
It makes me nervous, yes.
Joy LaPola, Fox 45, News at 10.
Just can't wait to see them come out that door.
Surrounded by attorneys who fought for their release, 6 men, each convicted of murder, walked out of court free for the first time in decades. Zachary McAllister spent the past 38 years in prison.
I'm just pleased to be home, happy to be with my family.
The nightmare's over.
Back in 1975, McAllister was convicted of killing the owner of a butcher shop during an armed robbery. Just prior to him being set free, the state explained how they tried to find family members of his victim, but were unsuccessful at it.
This is the best time of my life right now.
A judge sentenced John Wesley Henderson to life plus 15 years for murder. But during his trial, jurors were given instructions that Maryland's Court of Appeals has found to be unconstitutional.
The judges told the jurors, believe it or not, that they were the judges of the law, not the judge.
As a professor with the University of Maryland School of Law,
this was a very unique and sad part of Maryland criminal history.
Mike Milliman has handled many of these cases, a long process that many of his law students have been involved in.
Trying to find records. These guys were convicted 35, 45, 48 years ago, and believe it or not, a lot of courts destroy records even if you're still locked up in prison.
But what about my dad's rights?
The convicted killer of Karen Wilson's father was released last month.
I just feel like it's a slap in the face to every murder victim that's involved in all of this.
Statewide, it's expected that as many as 300 cases could be affected by the higher court's ruling. That could lead to more rejoicing for families like these, but frustration and anger for others. On September 29, 1969, Esther Leibowitz disappeared on her way home from school.
I remember it vividly, like it happened yesterday.
Abba Polyakov was 17 when his cousin was killed.
To this day, it shakes me to think that people can be so violent.
A preliminary autopsy showed Esther had been beaten to death, struck in the head 17 times. Police arrested this man, Wayne Stephen Young. They suspect that Young killed Esther in the basement of a tropical fish store.
Forced her down into the basement, tied her up, and left her there until later in the evening when he came down and raped her and murdered her.
It took jurors 20 minutes to find Young guilty of murder. He received a sentence of life in prison. While Young has been denied parole up to this point, that could change in a matter of weeks. The result of a recent Court of Appeals ruling. that found jury instructions prior to 1980 were unconstitutional. Jurors were instructed at that time that they were the judges of law. Words that have led to dozens of life sentences to be overturned in just Baltimore alone.
How dare judges in an ivory tower sit and decide cases now and overturn 45 years of precedent.
In the case of Wayne Young, court documents we obtained reveal he's scheduled to appear before a judge in February.
Those type of people can't be allowed to reside among our communities. Esther Leibowitz was not given that opportunity. She's not going to walk the streets again.
When I left out of the courthouse, I stepped out there with no cuffs, no shackles. I looked around. I said, is this the free world again? And I ran away from the courthouse.
Convicted of murder and sentenced to life, Williams expected to die in prison.
In less than, I'm gonna say, 60 days, a dream became a reality to my freedom. And, you know, it's overwhelming.
Williams is one of 14 convicted murderers to recently be set free in Baltimore City despite being sentenced to life.
I think for all 7 of us and the ones before us, that was like the happiest day of our life.
In downtown Easton, sheriff's deputies armed with assault rifles had the county courthouse surrounded as convicted cop killer Merle Unger arrived for his sentencing. A sentencing that stems from a crime that was committed in 1975.
I'm the oldest one here that was involved in it.
Ralph Ryland was a Hagerstown police officer with Donnie Klein when Klein was murdered.
Shot and killed, murdered by an armed robber.
A crime committed during one of Unger's many escapes.
Just that image of, you know, if he could kill a cop, he could do anything else.
Facing life in prison, Unger appealed. And last year, Maryland's Court of Appeals overturned his conviction. The court found jury instructions to be unconstitutional. The state's attorney could have cut a deal with Unger, but instead, they retried him.
Because a man killed a Hagerstown police officer in 1975, and that's not how we do things in Washington County.
Again, Unger was found guilty. The question then became, would he again receive a life sentence? At one point during his sentencing, Merle Unger did stand up, and he began to sob, turning to the officers who were here from Hagerstown. And Unger apologized to them, saying how sorry and remorseful he was for the events that unfolded some 38 years ago.
For what he took from our community, from Donnie's family, from his extended law enforcement family. We believe that was a little too late.
20 police officers traveled from Hagerstown by bus for this hearing.
It's camaraderie. I mean, we really belong to each other.
Many, like Ryland,
I'll never forget it. I was there. I'll never forget it.
Came here with heavy hearts as they remembered that fateful day.
They're with him. We're here in not only spirit, but in body.
Members of Unger's family also turned out to show support. Some even took the stand trying to persuade the judge that Unger had changed. Still, Unger received the maximum sentence possible, life in prison.
I think it sends a clear message to anyone in any jurisdiction in Maryland that this is not going to be tolerated.
While Unger's appeal has allowed dozens of convicted felons from the 70s to shorten their sentences, ironically, Merle Unger is not one of them.
Soap, combs, brushes.
To most people, these are just ordinary items. But to Karen Wilson, they are anything but that.
I found myself in Walmart just thinking how bizarre this whole thing is, that I'm here picking out things for the man that in my head all these years was a monster.
That monster murdered Karen's father more than 40 years ago. Sentenced to life plus 20 years, Karen was shocked to learn last month he was being set free because of a ruling handed down by the Maryland Court of Appeals.
And I'm angry at the people that let this happen.
Anger towards the courts, yet forgiveness for the killer.
A Bible verse would always come into my head where Jesus said, love your enemies.
Karen again felt God had intervened after she received an email that talked about sending care packages to inmates coming out of prison.
If you can keep somebody from going back to their life that they knew before prison, you're going to help everybody.
On the list of items, one in particular caught her attention.
The most important thing for all of this is that they pack a Bible in.
Next to the Bible is a letter she's written to the man who killed her father.
There are some things that I wanted to say. I hope he was enjoying the time with his family, and that kind of made me think my dad should be enjoying time with his family, and he never met his grandchildren. So, some of the things you want to say, and then they're hard to say. So that's why I don't think the letter's finished yet. I have to think about it a little bit more.
In Baltimore, Joy LaPola, Fox 45 News at 10.